What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Underdog Podcast. Today, I have for you my Week 5 power rankings. I apologize for them being a day late, but playoff baseball started yesterday. Had to watch Red Sox-Yankees. Go Red Sox, by the way. 1-0 against the Yankees. You love to see it. But today, we have my Week 5 power rankings. We're going from 32 to 1. You guys know the drill at this point in time. Again, this is not a standings thing. They don't really have anything to do with this. This is just how I personally feel about each of these teams heading into Week 5 now. And we've got a little bit of movement here this week. We got a little bit of movement. But we do not have movement at the bottom. Starting at number 32, staying put where they've been all year, is the New Orleans Saints. And I do want to say that they made this game a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. They did play, better in this game. Against, a good Bills team, they forced some turnovers, were able to make it competitive. But the big question that I have for the Saints is, you did spend a top 40 pick on Tyler Shuck. He lost the starting job, in a training camp battle to Spencer Rattler. You knew you weren't going to be very good this year to start the season. At what point do you start Shuck to see what you have in him? And then you can, make a decision, if you're going to have the number 1 overall pick, the number 2 overall pick, number 3 overall pick, whatever it is, of whether or not you're going to draft a quarterback for the future, or you're going to stick with Shuck or Rattler if Rattler really starts, playing well or whatever. But, at what point do the Saints make that decision is kind of where I'm at this point in the season with them. Moving on to our number 31 team, staying put, we have the Tennessee Titans. Oof, man. I didn't think it could get much worse than what we've seen the first 3 weeks of the season, but week 4, they were just bad, man. Brutal. I mean, from, not scoring any points in general, I felt like Cam Ward looked okay in this game, but Calvin Ridley was brutal. 2 missed field goals, would have made the game, I think, 7-6 going into halftime. You got a lot more confidence. Instead, it was 7-0 at that point, I think. I think that was in the second quarter at some point, and then they were just brutal from there on out. I mean, the Titans just have no momentum. I'm surprised that Brian Callahan is still the head coach of the Titans at this point in time after getting shut out by an 0-3 Texans team that really hadn't been able to move the ball a whole lot. So, that's just the question of when are they going to get rid of Brian Callahan? They got the Cardinals this week. You would think start 0-5, how much more time are we going to waste here with the Cam Ward era? Moving on to my number 30 team, dropping a spot, is the New York Jets. And I will say that they did, kind of got punched in the mouth, and then they came back, and, Justin Fields had a really nice touchdown run in this game, but he looks brutal out there at the quarterback position, just not moving off of reads, kind of the whole criticism of his entire career has been that processing, and he's still lacking there. I felt like they're still able to move the ball in the run game, with Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, who unfortunately got hurt in this game and had a brutal fumble for them. I think it was funny. I was watching PTI yesterday before the Red Sox game, and Tony Kornheiser was reading a quote from Breece Hall that he had said to the media, and he said that, other teams shoot themselves in the foot, we come back and shoot ourselves in the head. And that's just the most Jets quote of all time to me. So I think that he's right, though. If the Jets didn't shoot themselves, he said in the head, but I'll say in the foot, I think that they could have won this game. I mean, it was only a 6-point game. They had an opportunity, to win this game. They continue to make mistakes. Moving on to our number 29 team, dropping a spot as well, we have the Cleveland Browns, who fell to the Detroit Lions, and it is Dylan Gabriel season. And, kind of like I talked about in Week 2 power rankings, why did this team ever start Joe Flacco? In my opinion, Gabriel was your higher drafted quarterback, right? You could have started Dylan Gabriel the first 8-9 games of the year, see what he has. If you like what you see, you continue to start him. If you don't like what you see, you move to Shadur Sanders. And the only time you play Joe Flacco is if it's just completely off the rails or whatever, or they showed you nothing in training camp. And the fact that Dylan Gabriel is week 5 and he's starting, in London against Minnesota, like there's nothing that he showed you in the last month to make you believe that he's ready to start now than he would have in week 1. So that's my whole complaint. Browns defense continues to be awesome. Myles Garrett and the boys are, putting every ounce of fight they have out there to give this team any sort of a chance to win. We'll see if the offense can change here with Dylan Gabriel. Moving on to our number 28 team, dropping 4 spots, we have our other Ohio football team. We have the Cincinnati Bengals, who just got absolutely embarrassed on Monday Night Football against the Denver Broncos. They got outgained by like 400 yards almost. I mean, Jake Browning looks miserable out there, missing, kind of easy throws to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. They still can't run the ball. They have 200 total rushing yards this season. There's 22 players in the NFL with at least 200 rushing yards. That's just pathetic from Cincinnati. I mean, the fact that they can't invest in this O-line is absolutely pathetic. The defense, I felt like, played a lot of bend but don't break, and they did get, some stops at some timely times. I thought that, Demetrius Knight, their second-round rookie, played a really good game for them. He had an interception in this game, and I felt like at that point, Denver was driving. I think there was like 2 minutes left in the half. I think it was 14-3 at that point, I want to say. It was 14-3, and to get that pick, I was like, okay, Cincinnati, get some momentum here. Even if you just get 3, it's 14-6. It's a one possession game, and they went 3 and out, and from there I was like, well, they just don't have it tonight. And you wonder if this team's just gonna trade Trey Hendrickson, tank, try and get a premium tackle or edge in the draft. I think that might be where their head's at. They do have Green Bay this week, or no, Green Bay's on a bye. Who does Cincinnati have this week? Cincinnati has Detroit this week. They have Detroit this week, so that's a brutal matchup there. But if they can't can't get something going, I expect them to be sellers at this deadline for sure. Moving on to our number 27 team, dropping 2 spots, I have the Carolina Panthers, who got absolutely boat raced this week by the New England Patriots. We'd love to see that. We'll talk about them soon. But as far as Carolina goes, I think that, in all honesty, I felt like their offense moved the ball a decent amount. They got into New England territory a couple of times. They had a really nice first offensive drive, and they just couldn't keep it going. They had to go to Andy Dalton in this one, and I question, their ability to, not run the ball really surprises me. Last year, they had a really good year out of Chuba. They haven't really gotten that. I don't know if that has to do with the O-line injuries or what, but really just they haven't been able to run the ball, and then defensively they just got punched in the mouth and they just got knocked out. I mean, they couldn't fight back at all defensively, and we knew that was an Achilles heel coming into the year for Carolina. They probably had the worst defense on paper, and they continue to be a problem there. They have Miami this week. We'll see, kind of who's going to bounce, the right way in that one, but Carolina sits here at 27 in the power rankings. Moving on to our next team, we have the New York Football Giants, moving up 4 spots as our 26th team here. Jackson Dart, rookie debut, got the win. Cam Scadaboo also looking very nice there, but they lose Malik Neighbors for the season with a torn ACL. Brutal, man. I mean, at what point do we just fix MetLife Stadium and get that shitty turf out of there and put grass in? I mean, come on. It can't be that hard. 2 of you own that stadium. You should be able to put your heads together and get that going. But as far as the Giants, I felt like Dart looked comfortable in this game. He wasn't fazed by the pressure. He showed his ability as an athlete to, attribute in the run game and, extend plays and stuff. And I felt like Dable really kept him, even keeled out there, and he looked good. He looked good in his debut. And the Giants defense came to play today, man. They had Herbert in hell in that game, and Shane Bowen finally got them, squared away and made sure that they were in the right spots and stuff. So it was good to see that from the Giants defense. Going forward, they have the Saints this week. Can they build on a back-to-back winning streak? We'll see here for the New York Giants. Moving on to our number 25 team, moving up 2 spots, we have the Miami Dolphins. And, I felt like the offense, again, looked pretty good for the first, for the 3rd week in a row. I felt like they were moving the ball, where they were getting the ball to Jalen Waddle, and Darren Waller, made his Miami debut and, had a big impact, had 2 touchdowns. they were able to get the ball to Tyreek Hill. Unfortunately, had a gruesome knee injury. Prayers up to Tyreek, fast recovery. But, there's doubt that he plays in 2026. So that might even be it for Tyreek. 31 years old. Speed is a big aspect of his game. Might not play in 26. That might be it for Tyreek Hill, which is truly sad if that is the case. But, I felt like I was really impressed with Anthony Weaver in this game. I felt like he, got his defense playing a lot better in this game. I liked the stunts that they were doing defensively. They were able to finally get pressure on Justin Fields. And I felt like they were just out there and excited to play. And even though this game was closer than, you'd want if you're a Dolphins fan, I was encouraged by this performance by Miami. I know it's against the New York Jets, but I think that's a starting point if you're Miami to maybe, turn the season around a little bit here. Moving on to our number 24 team, dropping a spot, we have the Las Vegas Raiders, who fell to the Chicago Bears on Sunday afternoon. As far as this game goes, Geno, gunslinger mentality, another 3-interception game. 2 of them, again, weren't his fault, tip passes and stuff like that. But Geno needs to clean that up a little bit, for sure. He's been a little bit too much of a gunslinger mentality. I think he needs to kind of dial it back a little bit. But they got Ashton Jeanty going in this game, which I think was a really big deal. Jeanty had 3 touchdowns in this game for the Raiders. He had a big performance. I think that they need to continue to, get him involved. And Brock Bowers has been quiet the last couple of weeks. I think that's because of the injury, but I'd like to see them get him more involved as well. And I think defensively they put up a good fight in this game. They had, they forced some turnovers off of Caleb Williams, but they kind of just let themselves down there in the second half. So I think that, Vegas back to the drawing board this week, see if they can get a victory in the next game. Moving on to our number 23 team, moving up 3 spots, we have the New England Patriots, who got a huge win over the Carolina Panthers, and Drake May looks legit, man. He's playing really well for the New England Patriots the last couple of weeks, looking really consistent. I was very happy with the performance, offense, defense, special teams. Defensively, I still think that, they got to clean some stuff up, but getting Christian Gonzalez back for them was huge. He was awesome against Teteroa McMillan this week, really kept him in check for the most part. Run defense has been superb. Another great day at the office run defense. And shout out to Marcus Jones, man. Had a punt return for a touchdown in this one. Almost had another one. He got tripped up by the punter. I really thought he was going. But, the Patriots, they're building some momentum here. Against big win against Carolina. They have Buffalo this week. We're going to find out how real this Patriots team is. I'm really looking forward to that Sunday Night Football game against the Buffalo Bills. I think it's going to be a competitive game. But New England, all-around sound performance. Big win for them here against the Carolina Panthers. Moving on to our number 22 team. Staying put, we have the Houston Texans. And I know that they finally got in the win column this week, but it's against Tennessee. How much can I give them credit for that? I can give them credit for, defensively, they still look really good. D'Amico Ryans is still coaching that side of the ball really well. They definitely made it tough on Cam Ward in that Titans offense for sure. And, when they got in the red zone, they kind of played that bend but don't break defense. That was great. And I think offensively, they started to figure out some things. I think they really need to play Woody Marks more. He had an excellent game for the Texans. I've been saying it for 3 straight weeks, but get Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel more involved. Jaden Higgins, big-time touchdown in that game. So, and then the pass pro, I think, still struggled. Jeffrey Simmons, had a play where he, sacked Justin Fields in, under a second and a half. I'm like, what are we doing? Or under 2 seconds or whatever it was. But I was like, what are we doing? Texans still need to clean some stuff up, but big win for them. They have the Ravens this week, and they're, super injured. So, if they're able to win that game, then maybe they can start to turn around their season, be in play for that AFC South division. Moving on to our number 21 team, dropping 7 spots. I have the Minnesota Vikings, and I know the Vikings fans are going to be a little bit upset about this one, and let me be honest with you, this crop of teams from 21 to 11 was really, really hard for me to put together. I don't even think that Minnesota played that bad in this game. I just think some other teams, played a little bit better. There are some teams that I didn't even move up at all that I thought played better. This was really tough for me to kind of, put the puzzle pieces together. But let's talk about the Vikings now. I think in this one, They got behind. They had a couple of bad turnovers from Carson Wentz, on out in Dublin, Ireland, and I felt like their defense played pretty well in this one. They didn't really, give up too much. I think they gave up the opening drive touchdown, was it? And then they gave up another long touchdown drive. I think other than that, like they played a pretty good game defensively. They, made Rodgers work. They gave up the long DK Metcalf touchdown, which I think was the difference in this game. But they didn't really, Pittsburgh didn't really drive the field on them in this one, honestly. And I think offensively, Wentz is going to have, those games where he's that gunslinger mentality. And, this one was kind of one of them. He made some plays, he made some mistakes. I think that, got to go back to the drawing board this week against Cleveland and get a win in London, which they should have an advantage because they've already been out there. But moving on to our number 20 team, staying put, we have the Dallas Cowboys, who tied against the Green Bay Packers. And in all honesty, I really wanted to move Dallas up. Circumstances just couldn't, move them up. Dak Prescott was awesome, man. I've been saying it, Dak Prescott, top 10 quarterback in the league. He was awesome. Finally got on the same page with George Pickens. That was kind of my whole thing was got to get on chemistry if you're going to beat the Packers, and they really did deserve to win this football game. George Pickens was awesome. Jalen Tolbert made some plays in this game. That ridiculous throw that Dak had in overtime to Tolbert was one of the best throws I've ever seen, and they continue to be able to run the football really well. Defensively, they came up with the timely strip sack against Jordan Love, and even though they got thrown all over, I felt like they played a little bit better in this one than they had in the previous weeks. I think that if Dallas can continue to rely on that offense, I think they can, at least be competitive in almost every matchup that they have. Moving on to our number 19 team, staying put, I have the Chicago Bears, who escaped with a win against the Las Vegas Raiders on the road. In all honesty, I felt like they continued to build off of what they had last week. Offensively, they looked pretty good. Rome Odunze looks really good. They got, DJ Moore still struggling a little bit to get involved, but I think they'll figure out ways to get him the football more. I felt like Caleb played a pretty good game. And then defensively, I felt like Dennis Allen, coached a pretty good game. And, they made Geno uncomfortable back there, forced him into some mistakes. Kevin Byard had one of the best games he's had in a long, long time since he was in Tennessee. So I think the Bears are trending in the right direction. It's a tougher NFC this year. We'll see if they can be, in play for that playoff position later. But I think Bears fans should be excited about what they saw this week against the Raiders. Moving on to my number 18 team, dropping a spot, we have the Arizona Cardinals, who, Chad Ryland, man, come on. I mean, what a ridiculous error at the end of the game to not be able to, properly execute that knuckleball kickoff. I mean, that was brutal. Kyler Murray, I think that a lot of people are giving Kyler a lot of crap, but I felt like he was great in that game. That the first interception that he threw was Marv just throttling down, and it was a high throw, so I don't know if it would have been complete, but I mean, that was just, that one was on Marv, and then the drop by Marvin Harrison was brutal, but it was good to see Marv really pick it up in the second half. That touchdown meant everything to him. That was a hell of a catch. That was a hell of a throw by Kyler Murray. So to see those two kind of get back on the same page was really good to see, and I felt like that was a legacy quarter from Kyler Murray. He was balling in the fourth quarter, and for that game to go that direction and lose it in that fashion was just, I felt so bad for the Cardinals, man. Didn't deserve that at all, but, hopefully they can bounce back this week against Tennessee. I felt like the defense played pretty well. They didn't really give Seattle a whole lot in this game, but I felt like, in the fourth quarter they showed up when it mattered, and, they really had, a big performance there. Moving on to my number 17 team, moving up one spot, we have the Atlanta Falcons, who came up with a win at home against the Washington Commanders. I felt like Michael Penix played well in this game, kind of got back to what he had been doing well in 2024 that made him, such an exciting guy to watch coming into the season. Bijan Robinson is just absolutely electric. He had an awesome game this week. They've got Drake London more involved. He had his best game of the season for sure. And Kyle Pitts, kind of being revitalized. He had a big game. He had a touchdown in this one. And then this Falcons defense continues to be really good. I mean, got some pressure on Mariota, got some timely turnovers there. I felt like Raheem Morris is coaching much better than I expected him to this season. So, hopefully Atlanta can keep that up. The NFC is a tougher, conference, like I said, with the Chicago Bears. But, if they can continue to lean into Bijan on the offensive side and continue to, get production from their young guys defensively, I think that they're going to be a fun football team to watch and potential playoff team this season. Moving on to my number 16 team, dropping 4 spots, is the Washington Commanders. And in all honesty, it's more so how other teams played rather than Washington. I still felt like they put up a good fight without Jaden Daniels, without Terry McLaurin. I liked what I saw from this team. I think that they have kind of the tandem of running backs that have really, been able to run the football really well there with Mariota. I felt like Mariota played a really good game, showed some resilience, kind of got this team back in the game when it felt like they were out of it. Debo looks pretty good. Like I said last week, I think Debo, finally is getting back to that form out there. Zach Ertz continues to be a reliable target. And defensively, I'm really liking what I'm seeing, from them. I think that their pass rush was pretty good in this game. I think Penix was just good at getting the ball out quick. And then, I like what I'm seeing from the rookie Trey Amos out there in the secondary. He looks pretty good for them. So I think that once Washington gets Jaden Daniels back, I think they'll be able to, build some wins back up and get back into that playoff race. And then our biggest riser for the week, moving up 6 spots, our number 15 team, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars coming off of a huge win, on the road against San Francisco. I still don't really know what to make of this Jags team, but it's a big win. Have to move them up here. The only consistent thing I can say about their offense is the run game. Still an inconsistent pass game with T-Law and Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter not really being involved. I really, want to see them focus on that. But defensively, they've been awesome. And Devin Lloyd is finally living up to that first-round draft pedigree that he, came out with out of Utah. He looks awesome, man. I felt like he played pretty well last season, but I think he's taken it to an even, higher level this season for them. And Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker looking really good out there, man. For Jacksonville, they're really, the stunts that they're doing are really working. And San Francisco they can't pass protect. We've known that for a while. So I felt like Jacksonville, one of their biggest wins they've had in a long time, and they're in that race for the AFC South with Indy losing this week to the Los Angeles Rams. Moving on to my number 14 team, dropping 3 spots, is the San Francisco 49ers, and this team just cannot escape the injury bug. Purdy, Pearsall, and Jawan Jennings hadn't practiced, as of yesterday all week, and they got a short week here against the Rams. I felt like San Francisco, they were able to, move the ball in this game, and I felt like defensively they played well. They had some timely stops against, Jacksonville. Fred Warner had a great game, and they were able to, I think, get after Lawrence a little bit there. But turnovers in this game were the big one. They had 4 turnovers, and Jacksonville's been really good at forcing them this season. And if you turn the ball over 4 times, you're gonna lose most likely. I mean, we saw the Patriots kind of, last week similarly were able to move the ball, but turnovers killed them against Pittsburgh. This is kind of the same thing against San Francisco, and you wonder if you got no Purdy, no Pearsall, no Jennings, against the Rams, that's brutal, man. That's chalking up to be a loss there, and you wonder how much that's going to affect them in not only the NFC West race but just the playoff picture in general. Moving on to my number 13 team, moving up 2 spots, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers, who got the win this week in Dublin over the Minnesota Vikings. And honestly, if you're Pittsburgh, I mean, offense, looked okay. They got a big production from Kenneth Gainwell. He was, good for them in the run and receiving game. They had the long touchdown from DK Metcalf, who, kind of made his presence felt in this game. He had a really good game for them. But Calvin Austin, they lose him for a couple weeks, and then they lose Jalen Ramsey defensively for a couple weeks. And this defense continues to struggle, but, they had a couple of big performances from, Nick Herbig was really, really good in this game. I felt like Peyton Wilson was really good in this game. TJ Watt had an interception in this game. So they had, some timely performances from when they needed it. But I wonder when this is going to click, because honestly, this kind of group of teams, I still don't really know what to think of Pittsburgh. I don't know how good they are, because, they are 3-1, but are they actually a 3-1 team? I think the coming weeks will kind of prove how good Pittsburgh really is. Moving on to my number 12 team, moving up 4 spots, I have the Seattle Seahawks, who had a big win on Thursday night over the Arizona Cardinals. Felt like, that was a, one that they needed to have, and they got it. Sam Darnold looks awesome, man. He's playing really, really good football right now. Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet had a big game for them on the ground. I felt like their pass protection was really good in this game, which Seattle's really struggled with the last couple of years. So I felt like this was one of their better games in a long time pass protecting. And then, defensively, I felt like they were really, really good. They stopped the run really well in this game, even though Trey Benson only got like 8 carries. And I feel like they, kind of boxed in Kyler Murray and stuff, in the passing game up until the fourth quarter where they had a couple of bad penalties. I felt like Tariq Woolen, really struggled in the fourth quarter. And, they kind of let Arizona back into the game. And then, the bad kickoff from Chad Ryland, and they were able to execute, with little time on the clock and get in position to kick a field goal. It was good situational football there from Seattle. But, moving into this week, I think Seattle, they got a real big chance to really, take the lead in the NFC West, and we'll see, if they can continue to, play at this high level. Moving on to my number 11 team, moving up 2 spots. Speaking of teams that I just don't know how good they are, it's the Denver Broncos, who put an absolute ass kicking against the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday Night Football, and they just dominated them. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But it's Cincinnati. I kind of expected them to cover the spread and have a dominant victory here. But we'll see how good they are because they're playing Philadelphia this week. I think that's a good measuring stick for them this week. Is how do they match up against Philly here? I felt like Bo Nix had a good game. Still missed a couple of throws, but I felt like he had a good game, probably his best game of the season. J.K. Dobbins, first 100-yard rusher for Denver in like 4 years or something like that. R.J. Harvey got more involved in this game. He got like 14 carries. He had a good game for them. Cortland Sutton, just an absolute demon. That box-out touchdown he had was awesome, man. Got Marvin Mims involved in this game. Got Troy Franklin involved. And then defensively, they were awesome. Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper were dominant in this game. Zach Allen had a great game. Pat Surtain was money against Jamar Chase out there. I mean, he was awesome. So, Denver, big win for them, but we're going to see how good this team really is against Philadelphia this week. Moving on to my number 10 team, I have the Baltimore Ravens dropping 5 spots. And I think a lot of people are expecting me to drop them further, but in all honesty, I still think they're just better than this crop of teams. Like, this is like, Denver's like the end of one tier, and Baltimore's the start of another. I think that's kind of how it looks right now. But Baltimore's going to be up against it. They have Houston this week, who's struggled, and they've really done a really good job against Houston in the last 2 years when Stroud's been there at quarterback. But they're not going to have Lamar for 2 to 3 weeks. He's got a hamstring injury, so they're going to go with Cooper Rush. They are going to be without Roquan for the next few weeks. He had an injury as well. Nnamdi Madubuike is out for the rest of the season. Nate Wiggins got hurt in that game. There's one other guy that I'm missing that got hurt. So Baltimore injury rivaled right now, and they got punched in the mouth by Kansas City. I was doing some homework at the time of the game. I think it was like 7-6, and I looked back and it was like 30-10, and I was like, what happened? What happened? So I think that Baltimore really needs to get right soon, or they're gonna be toast. And their defense has just looked brutal, man. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And offensive with Cooper Rush, I still think that they can operate in a way that they still are able to move the ball. But defense, I'm really worried about, especially with the injuries to Madubuike and Roquan Smith and Nate Wiggins. I'm concerned. And Marlon Humphrey's also missing time. That's the other guy I forgot about. So I am concerned about that secondary for sure. Moving on to my number 9 team, moving up 1 spot, I have the Indianapolis Colts, who fell to the Los Angeles Rams, but I still felt like they played a good game. Daniel Jones did have a couple turnovers, but I still felt like he played pretty well in this game. If it wasn't for A.D. Mitchell fumbling the ball through the back of the end zone, I think they probably win this game. So I still felt like they looked good. Jonathan Taylor was stopped by the Rams in this game. He didn't have as big of an impact, but they were able to get the ball to other pieces. Michael Pittman had a really good game for the Colts in this one. And then defensively, I felt like, they kind of met their best match of the season against the Rams. They struggled to stop Matthew Stafford, with the injuries to corner, especially out there. Charvarius Ward was kind of the only healthy guy they had out there. I think and Kenny Moore as well, but they just kind of attacked that other corner. Xavier Howard just got abused in this game. I mean, Puka Nacua had a day against him. So did Devontae Adams. But, I think that Indianapolis, you can still come out of confidence in this game that, your offense played pretty well and your defense, held their own against a really good Rams offense. Moving on to our number 8 team, staying put, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, I was wrong about this one, man. I thought they were going to take it to Philly and win this game, but defensively, I still think that they were really good in this game. I felt like they held the Eagles' offense in check. The block field goal kind of made a big difference, and in this one, and I felt like Tampa answered the call defensively, and I think offensively they struggled in this one. Baker threw a pretty bad interception in this one, and they just didn't have the juice that they normally had offensively till the second half, till it was kind of too late. Godwin came back, didn't look great. I felt like Wirfs was pretty good in this game. Coming off the couch pretty cold, so I think that Tampa will be solid moving forward here. Moving on to my number 7 team, dropping a spot, we have the Green Bay Packers. Offensively, good performance. Jordan Love, I felt like was really dialed in this game outside of the strip sack that they forced at the end of the first half there. They got the run game going more in this game, which I was excited to see with Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson. Romeo Doubs had a hell of a game, 3 touchdowns. He was awesome. They got Matthew Golden involved, which was really nice. Sprinkled in Tucker Kraft. I felt like offensively they were good. Defensively, just unacceptable. I mean, secondary was brutal in this game. They just don't have the caliber corners that they need to be a Super Bowl contender. And I still felt like they were able to get after Dak Prescott and make him uncomfortable, but Dak was just Dak. I mean, he was awesome in that game. So I think that if you're Green Bay, brutal to go out of there with a tie because I felt like they had an opportunity to win that game and they were just kind of lackadaisical on that last drive. But a tie is better than a loss, I guess. If you're Green Bay there, moving to 1-1. Moving on to my number 6 team, we have the Kansas City Chiefs moving up 3 spots, getting a huge win over the Baltimore Ravens that I personally did not expect. Xavier Worthy back this week, big time for the Chiefs. I felt like Mahomes played a really good game. Despite them still not being able to run the ball, he was really good. Tyquan Thornton had a little bit of a quieter game, but it was Kelsey and Worthy and some of these other pieces that were stepping up for them. Felt like O-line played really well in this game, probably their best game of the year, honestly. And then defensively, they had Lamar in hell, man. I mean, they had Lamar and that Ravens offense in hell. And shout out to Steve Spagnuolo, he had a really good game there. Chiefs moving forward, I think they kind of got right this week. Against Baltimore was a big game. They showed out for it. So we'll see if the Chiefs can continue this momentum. Kind of climb these power rankings as the season goes on. Moving on to my number 5 team, dropping 2 spots, I have the Los Angeles Chargers, who, took their first loss of the season against the New York Giants. I think it was a tough game for Herbert, man. He was really in hell against the Giants defense. They did a really good job of pressuring him. They forced him into some, brutal interceptions. I felt like the one positive offensively is you got Amari Hampton going. He had a big game for them, long touchdown run. So I think that you can build off of that, continue to get Amari Hampton, going and establish that run game, which we know Harbaugh wants to do. And then defensively, I felt like they played a good game. The offense kind of put them in some bad situations. They had the first and goal on the 5, and they were able to hold them to a field goal there. And, the first drive for them defensively was brutal, but I felt like they kind of settled in. They got after Jackson Dart a little bit, in this one, and they just couldn't make quite enough plays to win this game defensively. But I think the Chargers will be fine moving forward. A really good defensive game plan from the Giants here kept them from scoring a ton of points. Moving on to my number 4 team, moving up 3 spots, I have the Los Angeles Rams, who had a awesome performance there. Matthew Stafford just looks as good as ever. Puka Nacua might be playing at the highest level at the receiver position to start this season. Devontae Adams was great. Kyron Williams was great. The pass protection was relatively good in this game. I think compared to what we've seen from them, start of the season, I felt like they had, some good pass protection in this game, and defensively they came up big when they needed to. Got a couple of turnovers off of Daniel Jones. Jared Verse had a really good game in this one, they forced 2 turnovers against Daniel Jones and were able to get stops when they needed to. They got a big stop on Indianapolis that last drive, which sealed the deal for Los Angeles. Got a short week this week against San Francisco. Big game for the division. We'll see if they can come out on top. Moving on to my number 3 team, moving up one spot, I have the Buffalo Bills, who got the win over the New Orleans Saints. Wasn't really as advertised in my opinion. I thought that Buffalo would really handle New Orleans, and they kind of kept them in the game. Kind of did a little bit with what they did against Miami. So I think they need to clean that up, especially against New England, who's kind of proved to be a better team than both Miami and New Orleans with a good offense. But I think Josh Allen, other than the interception, played pretty well in this game. James Cook had a really good game. Defensively, I felt like they played pretty well against Spencer Rattler. I think they gave up a couple long passes, but and their run defense still is a problem. I'd like to see them get that cleaned up sooner than later there if you're Buffalo. And then moving on to my number 2 team, I have the Detroit Lions, who got the win over Cleveland this week. Another fundamentally sound game from Detroit on all sides of the ball. Offensively, kind of doing what they've been doing the last couple of weeks. Jared Goff looking good. Jahmyr Gibbs had a good day running the ball. David Montgomery got stonewalled though by Cleveland, who's got still got that really good run defense. They got Amon-Ra involved, they got Sam Laporta involved, and defensively forced a couple turnovers against Flacco, made it really tough on that offense to move the ball. Got after him, a good bit there and forced him to make some mistakes. And then Khalif Raymond adding in the special teams effect with the punt return touchdown. Just an overall great performance from the Detroit Lions, who are, one of the best teams in the league. And, with Cincinnati this week, I expect them to move to 4-1. Moving on to our last team here, our number 1 overall team. It's still the Philadelphia Eagles, who improved to 4-0 with a big win over Tampa Bay. I felt like they came out there, really good performance, especially defensively. They really kept Tampa Bay in check in the first half. They got after Baker in this one, made him uncomfortable, had a couple of turnovers in this game. And then offensively, I think they just continue to just do just enough to win football games. Kind of what Kansas City's done the last couple of years, just do enough to win the football game. I still think they need to, kind of balance it out, get some more production out of the offense in order to, really be kind of that killer team that, we've known Philly to be the last, year plus, because they're currently 29th in total offense, so they need to, improve that over the next couple of weeks. But, another big win here from Philly, and they've got, another good team coming in Denver, this week. So we'll see if they can, improve to 5-0, because we know that Denver's got a tough defense, similar to Tampa, and, their offense has been, decent. So it'll be an exciting matchup there for the Philadelphia Eagles to see if they can improve to 5-0. As they're one of only 2 undefeated teams left now with them in Buffalo. But that'll do it for my Week 5 power rankings. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below, what you agreed with, what you disagreed with. And stay tuned tomorrow for my Week 5 picks. Those will be coming at you tomorrow. And then I will have a quiz on Friday. I recorded the wrong part of the screen, which is why we didn't have a quiz on Friday. But I will have one. I promise. I will have one this week. But anyways, guys, as always, have a great day and peace.